Alright, today we're going to be showing you how to disassemble a 1985 Virago 750, and this is a V-twin motor, so it is going to take some time to pull apart. But first thing, we've got our motor mount up top here. This is your front cylinder, and we've got 4 17mm bolts to pull off there. And we'll be doing the front first, so everything that we pull off there, at least for the most part, will be the front. So we've got brass washers underneath here, kind of uses a spacer. We've got 19mm bolts here, and these are a head bolt. Evidently we have some rust. Alright, got all but one off. We'll probably have to grab another battery to get that other one off. Got an oil line here, it's a 19mm. Oh, sorry, excuse me, it's 17mm. And to pull this head off of there, we'll probably have to remove the oil line that's down there. We've got crust washers on either side. It's a banjo bolt there. So you want to make sure that those are all held together. One goes on either side of the oil line there. Okay, your intake boots here, one on either side. Those are held on by 10mm. We'll actually leave those on for now. And I'll spin this motor and scoot it over so you can see it, so we can pull a couple Allens off here. We've got 2 6mm Allens down here, and then to pull this valve chain cover off is 2 Allens as well. 2 smaller Allens. So we've done that. We're going to adjust valves on this bike here. Obviously you don't have to pull the motor out to adjust the valves, but we'll show you how to do that in a different video. We will pull your cam chain tensioner, which on the front cylinder head, it's over here in the back. And that's going to loosen up this chain that's running up to the camshaft up here. And we need to do that to be able to pull that head off of there. So, $5mm Allen to pull this cam chain tensioner off. There's your cam chain tensioner there. And to reset it, you need to pull those with the Phillips. You need to pull that off there. We've got a camshaft sprocket, which you won't be able to see there from your angle, but it's 17mm. Pull that off there. Had to use air, it was a little bit tougher to come off. Now, we've got that cam chain tensioner off, so the chain is extremely loose, but we'll still have to take that 17mm bolt off there to pull this out. And then we can pull that chain off of there. And I'm going to try to hang on to this chain until we get the head off there. So this sprocket here, let it sit there. It looks like it's going to stay there. So go ahead and finish pulling this rusted head bolt off. Oh, that wasn't even one. Alright, whole thing ended up coming with it, which is fine. So that's how long those studs are going down into your motor. It goes clear down into your crankcase. So we've got head bolts off, we've got the cam sprocket off. You don't have to remove valve covers to do this. And we've got oil line disconnected. We've got a head bolt down here. 14mm head bolt. We'll need an extension to go on this one. All these will need to be torqued down when going back together. Alright, everything's off there. Now we've got a gasket that's going to be sealing it. You want to make sure that you get a good gasket back in there going back together. If this has rust, which we know it does, sometimes they can be a bit of a challenge to move off of there. They are, it's loose, which is a good sign, but sometimes if you can find a spot to put a little pressure on it, sometimes that helps. You want to make sure you don't get in an area where you're going to break a fin, and that is extremely easy to do. So that gasket kind of holds us up there from sliding off too easily. That oil line we should be able to move out of the way enough to pull this head off. So head is off there. There's your valves. We have your intake valve here and your exhaust there. Excuse me, vice versa. Exhaust here, intake here, and your intake is much larger than your exhaust. So there's your cam, and I'll put this back on there now that you can see it, but there's a hole for that cam sprocket to go on there. And we've got this. And there's a little divot there that lines up with the divot on the sprocket, and what that is to find top dead center on your motor there to adjust your valves. So you want to make sure that that sits down in where it should. And that is your cylinder head for the front. Go ahead, and we've got your 5mm Allen. Remove the 3 over here on the cam chain side. You want to make sure you're seated down inside those Allens before you twist it, because once they round off, they are a challenge to get apart. All 3 of those are loose. Once we get this cylinder off here, we'll go to the rear and start pulling that head off. Everything's going to be pretty much the same on there. Alright, those 3 are off. And that is all that is holding. This is your cylinder head gasket. So if somebody says you're needing a head gasket, your head gasket's leaking, that's going to be this gasket here, and this is sealed on there, so we're just going to leave that. Here's your dowel pins, and those kind of hold your gaskets into place while you put your motor back together. Same thing on this one. Gasket kind of keeps it in place there, keeps it stuck. But if you're using a bar, just want to be awful careful where you pry on. And you don't want to pry in between the crankcase and the cylinder. Alright, and you can pull those straight off. So that is your front cylinder there. There's a dowel pin that came out of the bottom. Here's your cam chain guide for the front. We're going to set the front over here. Well, we'll set all of them. The front's going to be on this side. Now to remove your piston, I like to take a small pick or a small screwdriver and get in behind the clip, the circlip, and pry it out of there. I like to put my finger over top of there. Try not to stab my finger, but keep that circlip from flying out. Now when you get that pin out of there, or that clip out of there, you can take, generally it doesn't take very much pressure at all to push those pins out of there. If your motor has been seized or it got really hot, you'll have to work out a whole lot more. And you don't want to damage that crank when you're pushing on that, so just be really careful how you pound on that. The pin goes back in there. Take that circlip, I like to stick it back in there, just so we know where that's at. Put it in there like that. Take your, well, it's a whole lot easier to do it with a screwdriver. Push it down in there, well, push it down in there into the groove, open side up, and then take your screwdriver and pry it in. It's a lot easier to do it when it's sitting down on the table, so you're not having to hold it. So, got your cam chain here and your guide. Now this is going to be, we're going to pull this clutch cover assembly off before we pull this guide. We've got your starter here. And that's a 10 millimeter to take your hot wire off here, and then a 10 millimeter to pull your. That starter will be sealed over here with an O-ring. So sometimes those are a bit of a challenge to come apart there. You can tap on it with a rubber mallet. And this one may have a gear in there that we need to pull apart first, which that's easy enough to do. We'll do that after we pull this rear cylinder off. So same thing, we got an engine mount up here. These are also the cylinder head bolts. So engine mounts are off. Well, we've got the same thing over here, an oil line going up top there. We'll have to loosen up or remove. That's a 17 millimeter banjo bolt. And this one's a little bit shorter, so we've got to actually remove this line. All right, we'll remove this line because at this point we'll take both these oil lines off. Those will stay together. All right, we'll pull the cam chain tensioner, which on the rear cylinder is back in the rear. Two 5 millimeter Allens again. And the bottom one's a bit of a challenge where it's at to come off. And then we've got your cam sprocket cover. That will need to come off as well. Rear tensioner there. Looks the same as the front. Cam sprocket. Cover right here. This has got some chrome trim on it. And then a 17 millimeter to remove that sprocket there. Make sure you've got a washer that goes on that bolt before putting that back in. Got good tension or good slack on that cam chain after we pulled that tensioner off. All right, we've got two 6mm Allens here, and then this head, whoop, minus the bolt over here, or the nut over there, will be ready to come off of there. Next we will do the stator cover, stator and the flywheel after we get this cylinder off here. Oops, I forgot we've got our 14mm that's over here. That cracking noise would be the gasket kind of breaking free there. And you always want to put new gaskets going back together. That gasket will sometimes, a lot of times, bind up on those studs, keeping it from coming off smoothly. So there is your rear cylinder head there. We've got a valve that's somewhat open, so we've got that cam not in the right spot. The other one was on top dead center from doing that valve adjustment. We'll go ahead and put this cam sprocket back on there. Okay, now your cylinder is ready to come off. Cylinder's off there. We've got your piston, your gasket's ripped here. The guide just pops out of there. And same thing with the piston, just kind of get your pick in behind there, or your screwdriver. Sometimes the screwdriver's a little bit easier because it's a little bit thicker. That pin's off there. Sometimes you can just stick your finger through there and push it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of persuasion, but again, like I said on the first one, if you've got to persuade it too much, you don't want to damage that crank. So there you go. We'll put the circlip with it. That's the rear cylinder. We're going to flip this motor up here now and pull the flywheel off and the stator. Got Allens all the way around this cover here, and we've loosed them all. So I'm going to take an impact now. And I wouldn't want to take an impact and impact them out on this size of Allen because it is, they'll be very easily stripped out of there. Got your clutch cable coming down here, and that cover is 2 Allens to remove. Now, to adjust the clutch on your Yamaha Virago 700, you've got your clutch cable running down here, and you've got, tip it up so you can see a little better. All right, to adjust the cable on your Virago 700, you can take your clutch cable right here and you can leave it hooked up. You take a 12 millimeter, excuse me, a 14 millimeter. Oh, good grief. All right, we'll do a this is a 12. Yeah, it's a 12 millimeter. So loosen this lock nut here. Grief. This lock nut's tighter than it needs to be, but loosen that lock nut and then take a Phillips screwdriver and run that screw in until it touches, until you can feel it touching something, and then back it out about a quarter of a turn or an eighth of a turn. So you want to make sure that you're not constantly putting pressure on there. Your clutch won't engage and disengage right. So that's why you got to back it off a little bit. Otherwise, your clutch is going to sit there and fry. So as soon as you get it to where it needs to be, take the 12 millimeter wrench, tighten down your lock nut. Make sure that that center screw doesn't turn when you're doing that. If so, you just got to loosen it and do it again. And then I'm going to try to get this to a spot I can see there. And we've got oil everywhere. So to remove this cable, then they've got a little tab here that you've got to bend down. And then you take this cable, and if it's hooked up, it's a lot bigger challenge to do this. Because right now we don't have any pressure on her, very much pressure. Take that, pull it up as far as you can, and then slide it in that groove there. And that keeper that we bent out of the way would keep it from popping out of there, but we bent it down slightly to keep from having to do that. So we've got the clutch cable there. Evidently the oil was not drained out of this motor when we removed it. We've got an Allen head behind there, so you want to make sure that you don't miss that when you're trying to pull this cover off here. And we've got a broken piece there. All right, that Allen is removed. This looks like this is a post here that obviously keeps this cable pulled down. So you want to make sure that you note that that post and that spring is hooked up where they need to be there. You can pull that cover off there. Here's your sight glass down here. If you're digging into your motor this far, you probably know where the sight glass is. If not, you may suggest stopping right here and taking your motor in to somebody else. A couple spots you can kind of put some tension on this lever to pull up on, and that's one of them is right in front of those numbers there. right, and this is magnetic because of the flywheel here, so you want to make sure when you're pulling it off that you, there is going to be, just make sure you know that when you're pulling it off there's going to be a little bit of tension there. You've got a sensor down here that's still connected, and I'm not sure, some of these slide off, some of them are a Phillips screw. Try to get in behind this. This one is a Phillips screw. All right, we've got the stator here and the stator cover. We've got your pulsar there as well. And if you can see this cover here, this is the clutch area that we were adjusting. So we've got your gear position sensor down here. We've got an oil pump here. And I'm going to show you how to pull this flywheel now at this time. 22mm bolt. And I like to hang on to this so that we're not spinning that motor. Those cam chain can bind up and break that case, so you'll make sure you got pressure on there. Now you pull this motor, or this bolt here, and I take and put this back on, and I'll show you why here in a second. So remove that washer and then make it flush with there. Now you grab a flywheel puller on this model. Looks like this here. Then we might have to go grab some longer bolts, but we've got your claw here. This spins on there. And then we've got a point here. And the reason why we put this nut back on there, we don't want that crankshaft expanding when we push down on this. So we'll see if these bolts work. Again, it's going to be magnetic, so it's a little bit of a challenge to get these started. These aren't long enough, so we'll grab a little bit longer ones. All right, we've got some longer bolts there. Set that right down, and I like to move this as far down as it'll go. And go ahead and put these bolts in. Now you want to make sure these bolts are threaded in at least a ½ inch. I like to go even farther than that if it allows it. Sometimes there's a bearing in behind there that won't allow you to go any farther. But if you're not in far enough, one side will pop out, your flywheel's junk at that point. Grab our impact socket there, grab our DeWalt 20 volt, 3/8 impact. And I still like to hang on to that flywheel or onto that puller. You'll make sure you don't get your fingers in between there. It's not going to pop up because of that nut on there, but a lot of people forget to put that nut on there. Not the end of the world if you forget. Now, if it gets that far and you can't get it off there, what I do a lot of times, I'll leave my impact on there, or my socket on there, take and slam on it. A lot of times that'll break it free. If it doesn't, just stick your impact on there and this is a tight one. What I don't want is one of those bolt heads to break off and hit me in the face. I haven't seen one this tight in a while. There we go. Popped off of there. Now our bolts are bent. But our flywheel's in good shape, our puller's in good shape. We'll need new bolts, obviously. If I would have had a little bit bigger washer on there, it may have helped, but also may not have. That flywheel is tapered, which is why it gets stuck on there. I'll use that. We'll go ahead and pull this off there. Again, still hanging on the flywheel. And that is why we put these on there, is to keep those threads clean and able to just pull out of there like that. Now we've got your flywheel there. We've got a spring gear behind here, which is what you heard drop. And really pretty difficult to pull those off. I mean, keep all that together. A lot of times that's what happens, they'll just fall apart like that. And I'll show you how to put that back together here in a bit, but we've got springs and pins all over the place, so keep an eye out for those. Sometimes I'll put a magnet down there while we're pulling this apart because a lot of times they drop. Sometimes those gears will stay on there, but most of the time not. This is spring loaded here, so it kind of holds that gear into place. So here is your starter gear here. This is kind of an idler gear. It's a springed gear, and what this does is that starter we'll spin this gear, spin this one, and it's kind of rotates into the flywheel, spinning the flywheel, that starter gear there, and starting the motor. As soon as that happens, tension will come off of this gear here and drop back down into place. These are kind of a known problem for these Viragos, to have starter problems and starter gear problems. Pull the starter off. We've got a clip here, or a spring. Let's see. It's got a circlip holding us in there. Or a snap ring, excuse me. Pull that off there. That starter then should pop out of there, and that gear will probably stay in place. Starter's out there. You want to make sure that spins freely. And then we can go ahead and test that. And here is the gear that was on the end there. It's got this circle up here. We'll put both those pieces together. We'll sell them as a set. Pull your oil pump. We've got a handful of Allens here, or just 2 Allens, I guess, that we'll have to loosen. And this is just a cover for this oil pump and the chain there. Got your gear shifter here. And then a 10mm to remove that oil pump gear. But we might try to turn this motor over enough. No, we're not going to be able to get to all the Allens, so we'll pull that 10 millimeter oil pump gear. Like, keep tension on this chain so it doesn't spin that motor. Once we get that off, then we'll be able to get to those Allens to remove. Got 3 Allens we need to remove here. And you don't have to remove the Phillips on this one. This Allen here is not in a very good position. I guess I did get it loosened up there. Got an oil line coming up here to lubricate that assembly. We'll pull that as well. That's a couple Allens. You don't have to do that to split the case, but all right, your oil pump then. We can just pull up. We've got a strainer on there with a screen, and then we've got a couple, or one of those pins from that starter gear from behind that flywheel that we were able to find there. So this shift shaft here, we'll just be able to pull up, but there's a spring-loaded arm back here, so I'll have to pull that spring-loaded arm. And it is spring-loaded. I thought it came up here. All right, we're not going to force it too much. I was pretty confident it came out of there. There we go. It does come out of there. So that shift assembly just pulls out right there. I've got your shift star here. And in the right spot, that'll all come out together. Bearing and all. We'll leave it there. We might have to pull that star off so that that bearing stays there. We've got a holder here for your this tensioner bolt here, or the tensioner gear. Pull this 10 millimeter, pull that keeper off there, and then this will slide out of there. And then we're able to get that gear out of there. That's the bottom cam chain for the rear, bottom cam chain sprocket there. All right, oil lines just come off 5 millimeter bolts. We won't go through all of that. Your guide here, this is pulled off. Got 10 millimeter here. We've got a lock nut here to loosen this. And then that just pulls up out of there. That just pulls up out of this. Bolt runs right down inside that guide there. So that's for the rear. And we will flip this motor over now and pull the clutches apart.